In October 1944, something unprecedented in American military history occurred at the Boston Harbor in Massachusetts. A transport ship docked carrying 38 German women who had been captured during the Allied invasion of Normandy. Nurses, secretaries, and auxiliary personnel who had served the Wehrmacht. As they stepped onto American soil, these women expected to face the barbaric treatment the Nazi propaganda had promised awaited all prisoners of the demon Americans. Instead, they found themselves staring at electric dock lights, paved wharves, and warehouses taller than anything they had ever imagined. But the real shock came when they realized that in America, even prisoners of war lived better than most German civilians had before the war. 24-year-old Erika Fischer, a former army nurse from Dresden, pressed her face against the window of the military transport vehicle and whispered to her fellow prisoners, "This cannot be the same America we were told about." She was about to discover that everything she thought she knew about her enemy was wrong. Before we explore how this revelation changed everything for these women, tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from viewers around the world who are fascinated by these untold stories of human discovery during wartime. Erika had volunteered as an army nurse in 1942, driven by patriotic duty and the belief that Germany was fighting a noble war against a primitive, resource-poor nation. Nazi propaganda had taught her that Americans lived in wooden shacks, ate poor food, and possessed technology inferior to Germany's advanced society. But as the military convoy drove through Boston toward the internment facility at Camp Algona in Iowa, Erika stared in amazement at sights that contradicted everything she had been told. Cars filled every street, not just military vehicles, but private automobiles owned by ordinary citizens. Electric signs advertised products she had never heard of. Buildings reached toward the sky with architectural sophistication that made Berlin's structures seem modest by comparison. "Nurse Fischer," whispered Hilda Becker, a secretary who had been working at a military headquarters in Paris. "Look at the clothing the American women are wearing. Even the common people dress better than our officers' wives." Erika followed Hilda's gaze and felt her understanding of the world shift fundamentally. American women walked freely on the sidewalks, wearing colorful dresses made from fabrics that would have been considered luxury items in Germany. They carried leather handbags, wore cosmetics, and moved with a confidence that seemed impossible for a nation supposedly weakened by war. "This is not possible," Erika murmured. "We were told that America was suffering from shortages, that their people were starving, that their cities were primitive. But the evidence streaming past their convoy windows told a different story. America wasn't just surviving the war, it appeared to be thriving. The abundance was overwhelming, almost offensive to women who had spent years living with rationing, blackouts, and constant shortages. As their transport headed toward the railway station where they would board a train to Iowa, Erika began to understand that Germany hadn't just underestimated American military power. They had fundamentally misunderstood the entire nature of American society. Said, "The train journey from Massachusetts to Iowa provided Erika and her fellow prisoners with a cross-country education in American industrial and social development that left them speechless. For 4 days, they watched through the windows as endless farmland, massive factories, and prosperous cities rolled past in a display of abundance that seemed impossible to reconcile with their pre-war understanding of America. Look at the farms," said Greta Hoffman, a young woman who had worked as a communications clerk before her capture. "The fields stretch beyond the horizon, and every farm has machinery I've never seen before." Erika pressed her face to the window, watching enormous tractors working fields that dwarfed anything in Germany. The agricultural technology was decades ahead of German farming methods, and the scale was incomprehensible. Single American farms appeared larger than entire German villages. But it was the cities that truly shattered their worldview. As the train passed through industrial centers like Pittsburgh and Chicago, the prisoners witnessed manufacturing facilities that produced goods at a scale that explained how America could fight a war on 2 continents while maintaining civilian prosperity. "Fischerin," Hilda whispered, using formal address despite their shared captivity. "If America has this much industrial capacity, how did our leaders believe we could win a war against them?" It was a question that haunted Erika as she watched factory after factory pass by their train window. Each facility was larger than Germany's biggest manufacturing plants, and there seemed to be hundreds of them. Smokestacks reached toward the sky. evidence of production levels that could supply both civilian needs and military requirements simultaneously. The American guards assigned to escort the prisoners were surprisingly friendly, offering food and answering questions about the sights outside the train. Sergeant Elizabeth Carter, an Irish-American woman from New York, noticed Erica's fascination with the passing landscape. "You seem surprised by what you're seeing," Sergeant Carter said in careful English, which Erica understood from her medical training. "America is different than we were told," Erica replied hesitantly, her English heavily accented but comprehensible. Sergeant Carter smiled sympathetically. "What were you told about America, miss?" Erica struggled to find words that could explain the complete contradiction between Nazi propaganda and American reality. "We were told that Americans were poor, that your cities were small, that your people had no culture or technology." Sergeant Carter nodded with understanding that surprised Erica. "Propaganda tells people what their governments want them to believe, not what's true. You'll learn more about real America where you're going." DTO, the Camp Algona in Iowa, where the German women prisoners would spend the remainder of the war, provided Erica with the most shocking revelation of all. Even in captivity, she would live better than she had lived as a free citizen in Germany. The camp consisted of neat rows of barracks with running water, electricity, and indoor plumbing, amenities that had been rare luxuries in rural Germany. Each unit had a small stove, electric lighting, and access to a communal laundry facility with modern washing machines. "This is impossible," Erica said to herself as she explored the small quarters she would share with 3 other women. Prisoners cannot live like this, but the accommodations were only the beginning. The camp had a hospital with modern medical equipment that surpassed most German civilian facilities. There was a library with books, magazines, and educational resources that exceeded what had been available in many German schools. The camp even had recreation facilities, workshops where prisoners could learn new skills, and a theater for films and performances. Dr. Margaret Sullivan, the camp's medical director, conducted intake examinations for the new arrivals and was shocked by what she discovered. Many of the German women showed signs of chronic malnutrition, despite having served in military or government positions. Their medical histories revealed a society that had been suffering from severe resource shortages long before the war began. "Miss Fisher," Dr. Sullivan said through a translator during Erica's medical examination, "when did you last have a full medical checkup in Germany?" Erica struggled to remember. "Perhaps 2 years ago." Medical care was difficult to obtain even for military personnel. Dr. Sullivan made notes that would later become part of intelligence reports about Germans. "Civilian conditions. Here at Camp Algona, you'll have regular medical care, dental treatment, and access to vitamins and medications that will help restore your health." The promise seemed too good to be true. In Germany, even military nurses like Erica had struggled to obtain adequate medical supplies for their patients. The idea that prisoners in America would receive better health care than German military personnel had access to seemed impossible. But as the days passed, Erica discovered that the impossible had become routine. 3 meals a day with meat, vegetables, and dairy products, hot showers with unlimited water, electric heating in winter and cooling fans in summer, books, newspapers, and educational programs designed to help prisoners learn about American society. Becker and Erica said to her former colleague one evening as they sat in their electrically lit barracks, "I'm beginning to understand why Germany is losing this war." Within weeks of arriving at Camp Algona, Erica had volunteered to work in the camp's medical facility, where she discovered that American medical technology and practices were decades ahead of what she had known in Germany. The camp hospital had X-ray machines, modern surgical equipment, and pharmaceutical supplies that exceeded what had been available at her military hospital in Dresden. Dr. Sullivan had quickly recognized Erica's medical training and assigned her to assist with the health care of both German prisoners and Italian families who were also interned at the facility. Working alongside American medical staff provided Erica with daily exposure to technological and social advances that contradicted everything Nazi propaganda had taught her. "Miss Fisher," Dr. Sullivan explained during one of their medical rounds, "these penicillin drugs can treat infections that would have been fatal just a few years ago. American pharmaceutical companies have developed treatments that we are happy to share with our prisoners." Erica held the small vials that represented medical advances she had never heard of. In Germany, such medications would have been reserved for the highest-ranking officials if they existed at all. Here, they were used routinely to treat common infections among prisoners of war. But the medical revelations were only part of her education. The camp's administration had established educational programs designed to teach prisoners about American democratic society, and Erica found herself attending classes that challenged every assumption she had held about American culture and values. Professor Robert Hayes, a retired university educator who volunteered at the camp, led discussion groups about American history and government. "Miss Fisher," he said during one session, "what were you taught about American society in Germany?" Erica struggled to articulate beliefs that now seemed absurd. "We were taught that Americans had no culture, that they were selfish individualists with no loyalty to community, that their government was weak and chaotic." Professor Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "And what do you observe here?" Indeed, Erica looked around the classroom at American staff members who volunteered their time to educate enemy prisoners, at the systematic organization that provided better living conditions than most German civilians enjoyed, at the democratic processes that allowed prisoners to participate in camp governance. "I observed that we were taught lies," Erica said quietly, the words feeling dangerous, even in this safe environment. Professor Hayes's response was gentle but profound. "The truth is always more complex than propaganda suggests. What you're learning here is that societies can be very different from how their enemies portray them." That evening, Erica began writing in a diary that would later become a historical document, the first-hand account of a German woman discovering that her enemy was not the primitive, barbaric society she had been taught to hate, but an advanced civilization capable of treating even its prisoners with dignity and care. Such, by December 1944, Erica's transformation was complete, but it brought with it a crushing moral crisis that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She had spent 2 months living better as an American prisoner than she had ever lived as a free German citizen, and the implications of this reality were almost too painful to accept. The camp's Christmas celebration provided the final devastating proof of American abundance and generosity. Despite being in the middle of a global war, the camp administration had organized gift distributions for the prisoners, special meals with turkey and traditional American holiday foods, and entertainment programs that included both American and German cultural elements. Erica sat in the camp's community hall watching American volunteers distribute gifts to German women who were technically enemy prisoners and felt tears streaming down her face. The generosity was overwhelming, but it also represented the complete collapse of everything she had believed about the war and Germany's place in the world. "Fischerin," Hilda said quietly, sitting beside her friend, "I received a letter from my family in Leipzig today." Erica turned to her colleague with concern. Letters from Germany had become increasingly rare and increasingly desperate. "What news from home?" Hilda's voice broke as she read from the letter. "My mother writes that they are eating potato peels to survive. The bombing has destroyed most of the city. She asks if I am suffering terribly in the hands of the brutal Americans." The irony was so profound, it felt like physical pain. While their families starved in the ruins of German cities, these prisoners lived in comfort that exceeded anything they had known in peacetime Germany. While their mothers worried about their daughters suffering under American brutality, those same daughters were receiving medical care, education, and treatment that demonstrated a level of civilization Germany had never achieved. "What will we tell them when the war ends?" Erica asked. "How can we explain that America is nothing like what our government told us?" Hilda looked around the decorated community hall, where German prisoners were singing Christmas carols alongside their American guards. "How can we explain that we have been living better as prisoners in America than we ever lived as free citizens in Germany?" That night, Erica made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She began writing detailed letters to her family in Dresden, describing the truth about American society, the lies of Nazi propaganda, and the reality that Germany was fighting a war it could never win against a civilization far more advanced and humane than German leaders had ever imagined. She knew the letters would never reach Germany during wartime, but she wrote them anyway, creating a record of discovery that documented how an enemy's kindness had proved more devastating than any military defeat. Spring 1945 brought devastating news from Germany that forced Erica to confront the full horror of her nation's situation. Through Red Cross communications, she learned that Dresden had been experiencing severe bombing raids, and her family's neighborhood had been evacuated. But more shocking than the destruction was the propaganda her mother had been forced to write in her letters. "My dearest daughter," her mother's letter read, We hope you are enduring the torture and starvation that the evil Americans surely inflict upon their prisoners. We are proud that you suffer for the Führer rather than submit to enemy kindness." Erica read these words while sitting in the camp's library, surrounded by books her mother could never have imagined owning after eating a breakfast more nutritious than any meal her family had enjoyed in years. The disconnect between her mother's assumptions and her actual experience was so profound that she felt physically ill. Dr. Sullivan found her crying over the letter and sat down beside her with the gentle manner that had characterized all of Erica's interactions with American authority figures. "Bad news from home, Dr. Sullivan," Erica said in her improving English. "My mother believes I'm being tortured and starved. She would be proud to know I'm suffering for Germany, but I am not suffering. I'm living better here than I ever lived in Germany." Dr. Sullivan nodded with understanding. "Erica, what your mother believes about America and what America actually is are two different things, just as what we believed about Germany and what Germany actually is might be different too." This conversation led to a profound realization for Erica. If Nazi propaganda had been completely wrong about America, then perhaps American propaganda about Germany was equally distorted. Maybe the truth was that both nations contained good and evil, generosity and cruelty, advanced and primitive elements. But one fact remained undeniable. America had the industrial capacity and social organization to fight a global war while treating enemy prisoners better than Germany could treat its own civilians. This wasn't a matter of propaganda or perspective. It was measurable, observable reality. "Dr. Sullivan," Erica asked, "when the war ends, what will happen to us?" Dr. Sullivan smiled sadly. "You'll be repatriated to Germany, of course. You'll go home to your families and try to rebuild your lives. But what if Erica struggled to voice a thought that felt like treason? What if we don't want to go home? What if we want to stay in America and help build peace between our countries?" Dr. Sullivan looked at this young German woman who had been transformed by her experience as a prisoner of war and realized she was witnessing something unprecedented, an enemy who had been converted not by force or propaganda, but by simple human kindness and the demonstration of a better way of life. Blue. In April 1945, Erica received permission to participate in a remarkable program that would change her life forever. The War Department had authorized selected German prisoners to work alongside American researchers studying German society and culture with the goal of preparing for post-war reconstruction and peaceful relations. Professor Eleanor Wright, an anthropologist from Harvard University, had come to Camp Algona to interview German prisoners about their pre-war lives and their observations of American society. When she met Erica, she immediately recognized an extraordinary opportunity. A German woman who could serve as a bridge between two cultures that had been taught to hate each other. "Miss Fisher," Professor Wright explained during their first interview session, "I'm trying to understand how two civilized nations could have such completely wrong ideas about each other. Your perspective as both a German citizen and an American prisoner could help prevent future conflicts." Erica found herself in the surreal position of explaining German society to Americans who genuinely wanted to understand it, while simultaneously trying to comprehend how her own understanding of America had been. So completely false. The conversations were intellectually challenging in ways that her medical training had never approached. Professor Wright Erica said during one particularly intense session, "I think the problem is that both countries learned about each other from their governments, not from their people. German leaders told us Americans were barbaric because they needed us to hate you. Perhaps American leaders told you Germans were barbaric for the same reason." Professor Wright made careful notes, recognizing that she was documenting insights that could reshape post-war diplomacy. "What do you think would happen if ordinary Americans and ordinary Germans could meet each other without their government's interpretations?" Erica thought about her daily interactions with American staff and prisoners from other countries at Camp Algona. Italians, Japanese, and Germans shared living spaces, dining facilities, and educational programs with minimal conflict. When people met as individuals rather than as national representatives, humanity seemed to override ideology. "I think we would discover we have more in common than our leaders wanted us to believe," Erica replied. "Fear and hatred require distance. Understanding requires proximity." This conversation led to an unprecedented proposal. Professor Wright recommended that selected German prisoners, including Erica, be allowed to remain in America after the war as cultural ambassadors and researchers, helping to build the understanding necessary for lasting peace. The recommendation reached high levels of the American government, where officials were beginning to plan for post-war relations with Germany. The idea of former enemy prisoners serving as bridges between the two societies was revolutionary, but the logic was compelling. Erica learned about this possibility through Dr. Sullivan, who had been consulted about the psychological and medical aspects of such a program. "You would be among the first German women to live freely in American society," Dr. Sullivan explained. "You could help both countries understand each other better." Jim, the offer represented everything Erica had dreamed of since discovering the reality of American society, but it also meant abandoning her family, her homeland, and her identity as a German woman. The choice would define not only her future, but potentially the future of German-American relations. ABBA, February 13, 1945, changed everything for Erica and every other German person in the world. The news of Dresden's destruction by firebombing reached Camp Algona through radio broadcasts that left the German prisoners in stunned silence. For Erica, the news was particularly devastating. Dresden was her home city, and everyone she had ever loved lived within the firestorm radius. Dr. Sullivan found Erica sitting alone in the camp hospital, staring at her hands with the expression of someone whose world had just ended. "Erica, I'm so sorry about the news from your city. Do you have any word about your family?" Erica shook her head slowly. "Dr. Sullivan, I understand now why you have been so kind to us. You knew this was coming, didn't you? You knew that America had weapons that could destroy entire cities." Dr. Sullivan sat down beside her patient, colleague, and friend. Very few people knew about the firebombing plans, Erica. But yes, I think some leaders knew that the war would end with something terrible and unprecedented. The bombing of Dresden, followed by similar raids on other cities, provided a horrific explanation for everything Erica had observed during her captivity. America's industrial capacity, technological advancement, and social organization hadn't just allowed them to treat prisoners well while fighting a global war. It had enabled them to develop bombing campaigns that could end the war in months. "The kindness you showed us," Erica said quietly. "Was this because you knew we would need to live together after the war? Because you knew Germany would be completely defeated?" Dr. Sullivan considered the question carefully. "I think the kindness was because we're human beings, and treating people humanely is what civilized societies do. But you're right that it will help us build peace together." On May 8th, when the German surrender was announced, Erica listened to the broadcast with a mixture of relief and overwhelming sadness. The war was over, but her world had been transformed in ways she was still struggling to understand. "What will you do now?" Hilda asked her as they listened to the surrender announcement. "Will you accept Professor Wright's offer to stay in America?" Erica looked around the camp that had been her home, her school, and her laboratory for understanding a foreign culture. She thought about her family in Dresden, who might be dead or might be struggling to survive in a ruined landscape. She thought about Germany, which would need to rebuild not just its cities, but its entire understanding of its place in the world. "I think I must go home first," Erica said finally. "I need to see what has happened to my family and my country. But after that," she paused, trying to envision a future that seemed impossible to predict. "After that, I think I want to spend my life building bridges between America and Germany, so that our children never again have to learn about each other through war." The decision felt right, even though it meant choosing the most difficult path possible. Returning to a devastated homeland with knowledge that would make her forever an outsider in her own country. June 1945 brought the beginning of repatriation for German prisoners, and Erica found herself preparing to return to a homeland that no longer existed in any form she could recognize. The photographs and reports coming from Germany showed cities reduced to rubble, a population facing starvation, and a society in complete collapse. "Miss Fisher," Professor Wright said during their final interview session, "you're returning to Germany with knowledge and perspective that could be invaluable for reconstruction, but it won't be easy being someone who understands both cultures." Erica had been thinking about this challenge for weeks. She would return to Germany as someone who had learned to see her homeland through foreign eyes, who had discovered that everything she had been taught about America was false, and who had experienced a level of freedom and opportunity that didn't exist for women in traditional German society. "Professor Wright," she replied, I think the difficulty will be helping my people understand that losing the war might have saved us from something worse, continuing to live with the lies our government taught us about the world. The camp's administration had arranged for departing prisoners to take with them books, educational materials, and medical supplies that might help with Germany's reconstruction. Erica packed carefully, choosing items that would demonstrate American generosity and technological advancement to people who had been taught to hate and fear America. Dr. Sullivan came to say goodbye on the morning of departure, bringing with her a small leather medical bag filled with modern instruments and medications. "For your work in Germany," she explained, "and to remember that former enemies can become friends." Dean, as the repatriation ship prepared to leave New York Harbor, Erica stood on deck with her fellow former prisoners, looking back at the American coastline that had redefined their understanding of the world. The city's skyline, which had amazed them upon arrival, now seemed like a symbol of the technological and social advancement that Germany would need to achieve if it wanted to rebuild successfully. "Fischerin," Hilda said, joining her at the ship's rail. "Do you think we will ever see America again?" Erica thought about Professor Wright's offer, about the work that needed to be done to prevent future conflicts, and about her own transformation from enemy prisoner to cultural bridge. "I think we will return, Hildane. But next time we will come as friends working for peace, not as prisoners captured in war." The ship sailed toward Germany carrying 38 women whose understanding of America, of war, and of human nature had been completely transformed by their experience as prisoners of war. They were returning home with knowledge that would help rebuild not just Germany's cities, but Germany's relationship with the world. As the American coast disappeared behind them, Erica began writing in her diary letters to her future self, documentation of her transformation, and plans for the work of building understanding between two nations that had learned to see each other as human beings rather than as enemies. July 1945, Erica's ship docked in Bremen Harbor, and she stepped onto German soil for the first time in over a year to find a nation she barely recognized. The bustling port city of her memory had been reduced to rubble and ash, populated by hollow-eyed survivors wearing patched clothing and carrying the gaunt expressions of chronic hunger. But the most shocking discovery wasn't the physical destruction, it was the psychological devastation. The German people she encountered seemed broken not just by bombing and defeat, but by the complete collapse of everything they had believed about themselves and their place in the world. Fischerin, an official from the repatriation center, said as he processed her return documents, "You look well fed. The Americans must not have treated you as harshly as we feared." Erica struggled to find appropriate words. How could she explain that American treatment of prisoners had been better than most German civilians had experienced during the war? How could she describe living conditions that had exceeded peacetime standards in Germany? "The Americans," she said carefully, "treated us according to their own standards of civilized behavior." The bureaucrat looked confused by this response, as if the concept of civilized treatment of prisoners was difficult to comprehend. Erica realized that her first challenge would be helping her own people understand that their former enemies were capable of humanity and generosity. Her journey to Dresden revealed the full extent of the catastrophe that had befallen her homeland. The firebombing had not just destroyed buildings, it had incinerated an entire way of life. Her family's neighborhood existed only as charred ruins, and the relatives who had survived were living in makeshift shelters, suffering from burns and despair. Her mother, aged beyond her years and weighing perhaps 80 pounds, embraced her daughter with tears of amazement. "Erica, you have come back to us. We feared the Americans had killed all their prisoners when they used their terrible bombs." Erica looked at her mother's condition, then at the medical supplies she had brought from Camp Algona. Antibiotics, vitamins, and equipment that represented technology Germany would not possess for years. "Mother, I have much to tell you about America and about what our government never told us about the world." Over the following weeks, Erica used her medical training to treat firebomb survivors while carefully sharing her observations about American society. The conversations were difficult and often painful, as she had to help people understand that their suffering had been caused not by American brutality, but by German leaders who had started a war against a nation they fundamentally misunderstood. "America is not our enemy," she told a POWs gathering of survivors in a makeshift clinic. America is what we must become if we want our children to live in a world without this kind of war. The statement was controversial and potentially dangerous in the chaotic environment of occupied Germany, but Erica had committed herself to speaking truth, regardless of consequences. She had seen what lies and propaganda could do to a nation, and she was determined to help Germany build its future on accurate understanding rather than comforting illusions. By September 1945, Erica had made her decision. She would spend 18 months helping with medical relief in Dresden, then return to America to work with Professor Wright on building educational programs that would prevent future conflicts between nations that had learned to see each other as human beings rather than as enemies.